Welcome to Align to Your Design. I'm your host, Beth Davis. Isn't it time to wrap your business around your purpose and bring your greatest work to the world? Each week, join me as we explore various biometric tools such as human design and hand analysis and how to use them to fulfill your destiny and align to your design. We will reveal how to do the work you are designed to do rather than what you think you should do. Hey everyone, Beth Davis, how are you? Welcome to the Align to Your Design podcast, where I interview people who I feel are very fully living their design. You can be the judge of that. And then we look at their chart, their human design chart at the end of our session, and we talk about something that's in the chart. And today I'm going to give you a little heads up. We're going to talk about emotional authority, which is the most popular authority on the planet. Between 50 and 53% of humanity are emotional decision makers, meaning they're never really in the truth. They're just in clarity if they're lucky. So we're going to talk about what that means. But in the meantime, I want to tell you a little bit about our guest. I am going to read my notes because I want to get it right. Our guest today is an amazing woman named Dori Klass. And she has CPCC and PCC and Executive MBA after her name. And she is a complexity, depth, and relationship repair coach. Relationship repair coach. Indeed, she is. And we'll talk about that today. We're going to talk about why relationships rupture and how you can repair them. And then we're going to look at emotional authority. So there'll be a little theme today around this. She's a trusted mentor and spiritual guide who specializes in helping seasoned and successful professionals during midlife or mid-career to restore connection to their essential selves and move from relationships in crisis to relationships in harmony. She guides professionals to become more of the creative, empowered, and visionary leaders they aspire to be in all parts of their lives. Dori helps her clients to embrace the whole person. She uses that term a lot, the whole person they are, to know and feel and step into their full potential, their whole power, and the rapture of being alive. She spent many, many years in corporate, of course, has many trainings and certificates under her belt. And of course, the most impressive thing is that she is happily married, has raised 4 amazing children who are now young adults and relatively young compared to us. And she's beloved in her community and beloved in our community. So with that, I'm going to bring on the beautiful, amazing Dori Klass. And we're going to get into this conversation about relationships. And I'm very excited for it. So with that, let me bring on our beautiful, beautiful guest, Dori Klass, if I can do it, because sometimes I am not always so skilled. There she is. Okay. All right. Dori, welcome to Align to Your Design. Hello, hello. Hi.
Hi, Beth.
Hi. Oh, I'm so glad we have this time today.
Me too.
Now, I want to ask you, we've obviously had several years to talk and get to know one another, but for the people just meeting you, will you share a bit about your own journey through relationship crisis and what you personally have learned? Whatever you want to share about your journey from crisis to having harmony in your relationships. I mean, I realize it's not always perfect, but
yeah. Well, I always kind of want to trust what comes in right as you're asking the question. And the thing that came in was when victims don't heal, they become the victimizers. At the very least, we become our own worst enemy, and we become our own persecutor, and we become dangerous to be around. And that was me. I've been a victim of violent sexual assault multiple times. I probably was easier prey because I grew up in an environment where I wasn't surrounded by people who could love me as I was and needed. I love my family, my parents, my siblings, but and we're in good relationship now, but I was different. I was highly sensitive and a storyteller and just did life differently and was not so logical and rational, even though on some levels I am. But I didn't know then that I could see so far and so deep, and I wasn't surrounded by adults or other people who could meet me where I was and could help me to flourish as I was. So I became very self-conscious. I struggled with confidence. But I was a really good performer. I knew what got me love. And so I was an excellent student, a really accomplished athlete, not quite professional, but could have probably gone professional musician, and just performed my way into people's lives and in the workplace. And thankfully, I loved a lot of the things I did, so that was good. But my come from wasn't clean. My come from was wounded, was fear-based, was I want you to need and want me in your life. And it wasn't from love. It was from fear. It was from, and when we're coming from fear, I don't care whether you're in victim, persecutor victim, or rescuer victim, it's still not clean and it gets us in trouble. And so, yeah, my whole adult life has been learning how to shift out of that victim side into empowerment and learning how to come from a clean place in my life and in my relationships, beginning with the one with myself.
How would you identify that you're in victim? I mean, do you have a way that you can self-identify that you're in a victim mindset, feeling persecuted or fearing persecution, as the case may be?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I bring this up pretty much on every one of my calls with my clients. My husband and I have our mantras with each other to hold each other accountable to showing up adult to adult in more empowered space. So I use the simple version of Karpman's triangle, that where we have like victim, persecutor, rescuer, and each of those roles depend, when we're in victim space, each of those roles are a form of victim.
Mm-hmm.
So when we drop into rescue and we're trying to fix or schmooze or tell people things are okay or tell them what to do, we're in victim space. When we're criticizing, blaming, shaming ourselves or somebody else, we're in victim space. That's the persecutor. The former was the rescuer. When we're in the victim, the language is typically something like, I don't want XYZ. I don't want this. I don't want that. I'm not that. Don't do that to me. Woe is me. I can't believe this is happening to me. Why is this happening to me? Those are the kinds of things you'll hear somebody say or you'll hear yourself say, as opposed to, right, victim will go to creator or co-creator, and the language will shift from what I don't want to focusing on what I don't want to focusing on what I do want and taking responsibility for that. So, and I mean, even very seasoned, successful professionals I'm working with over and over again, we still speak in what we don't want, or we still get hooked into victim space because we're kind of a victim culture. We're hardcore in blame, shame. We're hardcore in helper, fixer. And then we also, whether we realize it or not, sometimes are defining what we want in terms of what we don't want. And then we're surprised that we get what we don't want, but that's where our focus of attention is. It seems so simple, but it isn't. If it were simple, we'd be doing it. But, so that's why we have to kind of create new grooves in the brain that help us to shift. So even just getting people to say what they actually want, not what they want from their kid, from their spouse, from their employee, but what they want. No small task.
No, it isn't.
Because we're a culture, we're a problem-solving culture. We're proud of that, and we're innovative. We'll even create the fire to have the fire drill because that's what we're so good at. Yeah, but then we turn ourselves and one another into problems to solve too.
Well, yeah, and I think it's even deeper than that. I was sharing with my mom the other day. I spoke to this woman who worked in a big corporation, and they had invented a product, and the product had a side effect. So then they invented a product for the side effect to the product, the first product, and without really connecting the two. And this woman brought it up in a meeting and said, the first product is causing this problem. She was fired the next day. So we very much live in a culture that encourages people to feel inept or feel that something's broken, but they're actually being gaslit. And they're actually being sold toxic things and then given something else toxic to fix it. How does someone get out of that? Like, how did you personally become aware of the snake eating its tail? That is this culture of the West, of just, hardcore late stage capitalism, as they call it. I mean, it's one of the better systems I think humans have come across, but any system is prone to corruption. So,
well, that's such a big question.
It is.
I always end up taking it back to my own personal experience rather
Well,
than.
that's what I'm asking. Like, what do you do to like navigate through without getting sucked into, as much as possible, these artificial constructs of victimization? They're actually created to keep people victimized. I mean, it's intentional. So I'm wondering, like, are you even, do you notice that, or do you feel like you figured that out and you're out of it and you're on, you're on a different level of awareness?
Mostly, I think I'm in a different level of awareness, and that is kind of the key. I guess you can't, right? They say you can't solve something or address something or, shift anything if you don't acknowledge it's even there. So you have to have the awareness. And I want to be clear, I mean, for the most part, I loved my 20 plus years in corporate America. I was in healthcare, and I learned a lot. I was challenged a lot. I was able to contribute a lot, and it was fun for me. To show up with people who are kind of bringing their A game, and you're all calling each other forth, and it's kind of a big deal. I did get to a point, though, where some of the trade-offs were too big, or where weird things started to happen. Like we're working really hard on a big project, and some of my employees are working till like 1, 2 in the morning, find out that one fell asleep at the wheel driving home, and he's got a wife and kids at home. And I took a stand for him taking a vacation, even though we were in the middle of this giant fire drill. And this is kind of was a major turning point for me in my career. My new boss, she was part of a new boss team. We wouldn't have hired each other, and ultimately they let me go. But it was a moment where I was arguing for vacation time because it was absolutely essential, and it was stupid that we were even having the conversation.
Right, right.
And her comment to me was, when you get to this level in the organization, you're on call 24/7, and you've sold your soul to the company. And I'm like, and I like my whole body, like I was in touch enough with myself at that point, right? And I don't live in my head fully. I am very much a heart-centered person, and was learning to get in touch with my body. But my whole body was like, yeah, no. And this is such a big no, I have to say something, which I knew was going to be potentially career ending or add to the nails in the coffin. And I just looked at her and I said, yeah, no, not ever, not ever. And I will never advocate for that for anyone I work with or for, or who works with.
It's like a cult. It's like hazing.
And I'd never heard that before in my 20 years in corporate. And so when she said that, I was like, ooh, somebody's just drunk from the Kool-Aid, can't go there. And the line was like hard. It was like no more line in the sand, no more trading off. That was just a hard line. And, I think that's the challenge for a lot of us, right? Is when we're in the presence of that and we're being asked to collude with those kinds of thoughts, or to conform, on a larger scale, whatever. And then that's the real challenge, is when we find, our voices and the courage to use them. Often there will be backlash, there will be, loss or forfeit. Sometimes it'll be celebrated. It's part of why I was so successful for, the whole decade I was in house doing strategic planning and large program management, is because I was willing to speak up about hard things, and people at all levels were listening, and we got good results. But there was a point where that happened, and it was personal. It got real personal, and they just didn't like my style, and that I did that I pushed back and asked questions.
Oh, because you actually were in reality and truth. It's become very unpopular. I mean, when a system becomes as toxic as ours has become, I mean, there's sort of no option but to have to innovate or go elsewhere. I want to ask you something, though. This is great. I appreciate you sharing that. Now that you work with couples, you work with people, whether they're single or in a relationship, if they're having a relationship crisis. And what I'm wondering is, what are some of the crises people come to you with? I mean, you just shared a crisis you had at work that made you realize, oh, that's actually the line. I have reached it, right? I have reached the point past which I will not go. And now you work with people who are dealing with all sorts of crises in their lives. And for now, for this question, if we could just maybe keep it to the personal relationships, what are some of 2 or 3 common crises you see among your clients where they're really struggling to find that harmony inside themselves and in the relationship?
Well, I mean, so they're often subtle. And when my clients come to me, they don't say, I'm having a problem with a relationship with myself. And they don't say,
Right.
Mostly my clients are super successful people, and they, when they sit back and go, wow, I'm like kind of shocked I have the life I have, and I've worked hard for it, and yay. And yet why is something missing? There's something's missing. And oh, then they race back up to their head and it's like, if I could figure out what it was, I'd fix it. Right now we're back in victim's triangle and rescuer, helper, fixer. And they don't even know they're there. They have no clue they're there. They would be horrified to hear that they might be playing in the victim's triangle or experiencing shame or something. But they're feeling bad because they're so successful and they're not. And it's not that they're not happy. They're happy on many levels and they're impactful on many levels. But what ends up being true almost to a person, at least with the people I work with, is number one, they've had a lot of sexual or relationship trauma early in life, which I did. And so even if we haven't talked about it, somehow energetically, there's a connection. And they've done a lot of work around it. They've done a lot of therapy, they've read books, they've gone to workshops, they got it handled, right? So when something starts feeling like it's missing and they start feeling self-doubt or self-conscious, then they go back there and start to wonder, well, maybe it's not handled, or maybe it's rearing its ugly head again or something. But what's really happening in most cases is there's this, that you read in the bio, the rapture of being alive, that there's this sense of, there's a lack of aliveness. There's a sense of barrenness inside, of emptiness inside. It's not so much, is this all there is, but there's a quality of aliveness that's missing. And I learned later in life that I had contempt for the fact that I went into kind of, fight, flight, freeze. I went into freeze. I kind of went limp during the rape crises. I didn't fight back. And for me, I didn't realize it, but a part of myself had enormous contempt for the fact that I didn't fight back. And so I had to get into relationship with my body. And I had to get into relationship with the parts of me that were contemptuous and the parts of me.
Can I interrupt you there? I like where you're going, but I know you'll remember, but I won't. My question to you is, in the midst of this, I've read in a number of places that psychological papers that when people experience that kind of sexual trauma early, they're more susceptible to it later because of some kind of behavioral cues. And I'm just wondering, for the listener, for their own children, or if they're in recovery from this, what were some of the cues or behavioral language that you were either sending out or receiving from the predator when you were older that you missed, that some part of you didn't get away from the danger, you were more susceptible? And I'm wondering if you could just speak to that before you continue.
Oh, so that actually brought tears to my eyes as you were asking. I even went back to the apartment of one of my rapists because I was so shocked that it happened, and I was trying to confirm or not that it did. There's this desire to redo it and have it be different, or a longing to be touched, held, seen, even if it's in the
Predator.
end throwaway.
Right.
And I do say if the victim doesn't heal, they become the victimizer. I was in textbook unhealed rape victim, like very sexualized, very promiscuous. I wrote a business plan to go into prostitution. I mean, it was the one thing I could consistently count on was to men to respond to me a certain way.
Right.
And I was otherwise so lonely and so isolated that.
So it was like a way to connect. Yeah.
Very unhealthy, very kind of weird, but yeah.
But common. It seems it's sadly very common. And Dori, one of the things I love about you that you're demonstrating right now, and I'm sure the listeners and watchers are sensing it as well if they're paying attention, is the degree of openness and vulnerability you can have about such sensitive topics that still, for most people, carry so much shame. Either the victim feels shame or people listening start shaming the victim for even having that experience, that the victim doesn't get airtime. And then we never really get to the root of the problem in our families, right? In our schools, in our society, as to why this keeps happening and how we contribute to it. But that's kind of a separate conversation. I don't want to go down that track unless you do. But so you experienced early trauma. It kind of set you up for later trauma. You then had the PTSD, CPTSD, and the acting out, which is all consistent with that kind of trauma. What was that moment when you realized something's got to change? Like, I have to change how I'm showing up. And I think you write about this. Right in this incredible book you're in, which I will talk about, Engaging Speakers, Voices of Hope, where Dori's published, and it's such an amazing story. But will you share a bit about like that turning point for you out of that mindset of being a victim and then being angry and retaliating and whatnot?
There were really two moments. Unfortunately, this came in waves. But the first moment was after my first marriage. I was actually separated, and I had been recruited to move into home office, our worldwide headquarters. And my ex, we weren't divorced yet. He stayed back in Houston, and I moved to Chicago or the Chicago area. And I actually started dating a guy. I never had trouble finding people to be with. And we worked together, and I liked him a lot. And we were sexually active, and I was kind of excited about the relationship and thought it might have a future. And then I found out, to my shock, that I was Miss Tuesday, and there was a Miss Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. And we all worked together, and everybody seemed to know except me. And it was horrifying and humiliating. And I was angry. And it was one of the first times in my life where I allowed myself to feel anger. And that was kind of like your previous question, is how is this solving? Is like getting in touch with my body and getting in touch with my heart and starting to give myself permission to feel things, and to have a relationship with my anger, and to have a relationship with my contempt, and to have a relationship with my sadness, and to have a relationship with my joy. And oh my God, you can feel like I feel so empowered when that happens. And we are, as a rule, I would say, pretty much suck at feeling anything and allowing ourselves to feel. So that was huge for me. But when I got in touch with that, and it was like, no, I had lost my sister to suicide like 4 or 5 years earlier. And one of the things that had come out of that loss was a conversation with God, like a numinous experience where I was given the command, because I was like, give me something, was say yes to life. But here I am, still limping along, making bad decisions, prostituting myself, not getting it.
Well,
I really
I
needed.
mean, you weren't totally, I mean, you were being deceived. I mean, don't
Well,
take all the
that's true
responsibility,
too,
you
but
know?
I'll own my part,
Yes,
okay?
yes,
And,
okay. Just
and
own your part, but not
yeah,
not
I'll own my part. But then then I find this out,
yeah.
and I think
Promiscuous
back.
coworker.
Yeah, then I find that out, and I
Oh,
think back to that say yes to life, and I found myself saying, my God, if I'm going to say yes to life, then like I need to mean it. And I will not let this kind of stupid thing happen again at my own hand. I will not let this happen again. I knew what I was saying no to, what I was, stop, just no more of this. I deserve better than this. If I'm going to say yes to life, and I want it to look better, I want it to feel better, I want to show up better. I don't know at all what that means. I'm supposed to be saying or doing or feeling or thinking, but today is the beginning of that, whatever that is. And if I never have a partner again, if I never get married, if I never have kids, if I never, none of that ever happens, which at the time I wasn't imagining it would, but then that's okay. That has to be okay. I want to just be a better version of myself, a better, coworker, friend, sister, daughter, whatever that is. I mean, I just was done. And this guy kept pursuing me, and it felt so good to keep saying no and not get all weird and dramatic and psychological. It was just like, no. And we're actually friends now, which is weird. But it's like, yeah, no, I'm not going to engage with another person this way ever, ever, ever again. And it changed everything. And then I'm reading books and taking a workshop here or there. Internet wasn't huge then, so there still wasn't a lot of access to a lot of things other than what was right in your,
right.
peripheral vision. The second major event, though, was, I don't know, like 12 years into my marriage, 13 years into my marriage. I was in coach training, and I was in leadership training with the coaching agency I was with. And it was a very vulnerable experience. I had lost my job. I had been let go after 20 years. And then I was in executive outplacement, had a number of job offers, and was just somehow very clear in myself that that wasn't my path. And I couldn't get to a yes with capital letters. And so for me, it was a no. But I was in the turmoil of that. Like, I don't know what yes is. I don't know what yes is, other than saying yes to my life. I don't know what yes is. And, I'm supposed to be earning, I was at a resume to run and was part of Abbott's leadership development program. And everything else. I was supposed to be running a division or a company one day. And that just didn't feel right anymore. And, but I didn't know what did. And I had 4 school age kids at home, my stepson and our 3 sons. And all the trade-offs were fine up until a point where it suddenly was much harder for me to be the kind of mother I wanted to be and the kind of executive I wanted to be at the same time. And I wasn't willing to make the trade-offs anymore. So there was all that, smash it all up. And then I'm in coaching training and in this leadership development stuff, and it got super vulnerable. And I was still pretty armored up. And I didn't know how armored up I was. I really didn't have a clue. I thought I'd done a lot of work. And what happens when the victim hasn't fully healed and you're armored up and somebody starts smashing the armor and you're not ready? What did I do? I went to the thing that helped me numb the quickest. I had sex with somebody, not my husband. And I came home and told him, and that was not good. And so the one thing I kind of thought I wanted, which was a loving relationship and a family, I blew up. I totally blew up. It makes me sad to think about it. And we had some hard fights. And I can still remember the looks on my kids' faces. One day, my au pair, we had au pairs for childcare for 13 years. My au pair took the kids to a McDonald's for like 13 hours to just get them out of the house. It was so bad. And it's like, okay, here I go, hurting the people I love the most again, including myself. I guess I still have some work to do.
Yeah, well, I get that. I mean, do you feel, I mean, it's very emotional. That's a tough thing, but you put it in context. And I think I don't know a single human. I never met a human that hasn't had a big whopper of a mistake. And invariably, and usually multiple big whopper mistakes. Like, I'm sure that wasn't your only one, right? And I'm chuckling because, I've never met this person, but they're almost invariably, the bigger the mistake, it's almost invariably goes back to some unresolved childhood pattern that it happened in trauma, right? That gets coiled into your nervous system unconsciously. And then you're adult and you act out and you go, wait a minute, what just happened? Who was that person? What was that about? Right? Now, if you had it to do over again, would you have done anything differently? I mean, other than maybe have not done it, but would you in retrospect, I mean, maybe it needed to happen.
Well, I mean, I have a hard time with those kinds of retrospective.
I'm sure, but I'm just wondering, like, have you contemplated on it?
If I had the work I'd done for the last 20 plus years under my belt, I'm sure I would have done some things differently. And I think that's how I help people, and I help myself, I help my children, and still in our marriage, I help us navigate. We can see the crises coming. And if I'm really honest, like a big part of what was coming up then wasn't just that I had, the scab ripped off of an old wound or anything. I was unhappy in my marriage, and I was
right.
And I was feeling stagnant, and I was feeling stuck. We were 11 years apart, and I felt like we were like little plastic people in a snow globe, not going anywhere while everybody else outside was moving and waving and life was going on. And I was stuck in some sort of little, white picket fence life that I loved on some level, but I was dying inside. There was no growth. There was no movement. It was like maintain the status quo. And I was out of my mind, miserable. And I was trying to tell my husband that. I was still trying to tell myself that. And I didn't, for whatever reason, it wasn't getting across. It wasn't connecting. So guess what? I used the one thing he'll pay attention to. It's like a 2x4 over the head. Have sex with another.
But even that, there's so much conditioning in that. I mean, can you imagine if we lived in a society where it was like, okay, so you bang some guy at the thing. I mean, that's my attitude. I remember once that happened in my marriage on the other side. And I was like, okay, so you did that. What did you learn? Like, what's going on with you that you would do that? Like, that was my response. Like, but I don't take a lot personally. So I'm like, it must be you're not happy in the marriage, but I'm not taking that on. Like, I'll take on my part, but what's going on with you? And I feel like that's a whole other, we could have a whole podcast just about ethics and morals and sexual, but I get it. You entered into this monogamous partnership. You had this thing happen. But Dori, every time we talk about this, I'm like, yeah, but maybe that needed to happen because it's what happened.
And let's be clear, betrayal comes in many forms.
Yes, it does.
And so I did the obvious one, right? And you can slap a scarlet letter on my chest, which my husband did. And now we're at a point where, it rarely comes up anymore, but there was a period where it would come up and he would cast himself as the victim.
Right.
He would cast me as the oppressor. Start to want to have some weird conversation from there. And I have permission. We have an agreement that I would literally do this and put my hand in his face and say, I want to have this conversation with you when you're ready to have an adult to adult conversation and you haven't cast yourself as the victim and me as the oppressor. I'm here as soon as that happens.
Right.
We would literally, like, that would be the break set. That would be the pattern buster. But somebody has to be willing to be that in the dynamic. Sometimes it's him, sometimes it's me. sometimes, and when I'm in my friendships, same thing, or, somebody has to be willing
Yes.
to take action on that. So we can shift out of victim triangle and into the empowerment side, that we can hold ourselves accountable and have, and that's where there's, in the mess and in that empowerment, in that space, that's where life gets interesting again, where there's like juice.
I'm sitting here marveling at the geometry magic because I'm thinking about your chart, your human design chart, and how your nodes are in the gate of intimacy and crisis, gate 36, and gate 6, which is harmony. And then my next thought was, as you've been sharing, wow, the curriculum is our life. Like it really is. If every human being on this planet could see, no matter like they're a boat person, they were a miner in some slave mine, they were raped a bunch of like horrible things that you've described. I mean, like I said, I don't know a single person that hasn't had a horror show to deal with. It always seems like if the person gets out of it, it's the curriculum. Now, some people never get out of it. Bless them. They never get the support, the education, the resources to realize they can do it different. They don't even know what a pattern is. Like pattern. What do you mean? I'm just living my life. But once there's more and more awareness, there's actually a way to change it.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, you probably thought of this, but just as the listener, I am marveling at how you are living what you came here to live. Because the only way out is through. So was there anything else you wanted to share about that before I ask? I've like two more questions to ask you.
It's interesting when you say that the only way out is through, because one of the things that I'm really clear about now, I've done a lot of consciousness work, a lot of depth work, a lot of healing work. And again, this relationship with our feelings, when we are willing to turn toward the trauma, and instead of putting the moral overlay, the psychological overlay, but we're willing to look at things as a force or as a pattern or symbolically. I mean, then it just something really exciting and alive starts to happen. And if we're willing to feel the shame, feel the guilt, feel the despair, feel the sorrow, feel the sadness, feel the loss, feel the anger, inevitably, and I think, is it Peter Levine who says like in 15, 20 minutes, like inevitably on the other side of that is love, joy, and ecstasy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But what I experience is, one of the hardest things, even when I was in corporate and a manager, a leader, one of the hardest things for me to tap into with my teams was joy, was experiencing joy. And I've come to believe that if we're not willing to experience the despair and the sorrow to the extent that it's there and like really feel it, then we won't be able to feel the joy, the love, joy. We have to, it's a continuum. We have to have emotional literacy. We have to have emotional intelligence, social intelligence, all that. And it's like, it's the thing that matters, as opposed to let our minds make up all kinds of crap about it and then get stuck in those stories. We have to feel.
Today as I was cleaning up my clothes and hanging them in the closet. I've been doing a lot of laundry, switching out the winter clothes for the summer. It's quite a production because I like clothes. So anyway, it takes a couple days. So I was just finishing hanging the last things and I was listening to Raw and he said something and I'm like, I think this is going to be important. And it sure was because you just brought it up. And in a way, he said, humans are always trying to be happy. And he goes, we're not designed to be happy. We're designed to be melancholy, sad, because our sadness makes us innovate and it's built into the mechanism. It's built into our genetic to go through struggle, suffering, melancholy, sadness, because it's the fuel for the innovation.
If we're willing to look and if we're willing to feel and if we're willing to play with it and not necessarily make anything up about it, just be with it. Yeah.
Just be with it.
Or
Now,
ask what's trying to happen here.
Yeah. So you have a particular love of the sensation of joy. Will you share? Yeah. Will you share about what joy means to you and why it's good for people to cultivate more awareness of joy in their life?
Well, I guess joy really is for me like the rapture of being alive, and being able to sit in stillness in the yard and hear the birds sing and be in awe. It has a spiritual component to it. It's not just personal, it's not just professional, it's not just practical, it's spiritual. It's like it's a calling into a higher frequency, a higher state. In our mystery school, we build temple space, we sit in sacred circle, we do dream work, and we chant and we dance and we listen to music, talk about things. And when you cross the threshold into that space, you're in a heightened state. And then you walk back out and you're in ordinary state and you talk about, the outfit you bought last week and the game you're playing at lunch, or whatever. And it's that, or you're cleaning the pool, or you're, giving your dog a bath or whatever. And it's just the normal life. But as we practice stepping into and out of heightened state, then almost everything starts to have a sacred quality to it. And to me, that's living in joy. That's making room for more joy, is to bring the sacred into the mundane, into ordinary life, to really honoring that in ourselves and one another, to see God walking, a stranger or in our child or whatever. And to know that rapture of being alive. Like when I feel that, I know I'm fully connected and aligned, head, heart, and body and soul. And, in psychological terms, there's that dance between ego and self. And it's where my ego starts to yield, all of the personas that it's funny, like here I am 64 and I've spent a fair amount of money the last 4 or 5 years finally to start actually marketing my business that I've been doing for 20 plus years. And so as I'm like loosening my grip and my attachment on all of these personas and who I am and what I am and all these roles I'm in, I'm actually branding myself, which is kind of funny. It's like a paradox, right? But I hold it lightly. It's not that I don't care or that it doesn't matter, but on some level I don't care and it doesn't matter.
Right.
What matters is the relationships, is the connection, is deeply feeling, holding space for one another, really trusting that there's vulnerability and power and vulnerability, that while we're in a body, it matters to be responsible for that, and to take care of it ideally, and to honor other people's bodies and the material stuff we're, sitting on or a part of on the one hand. And then on the other hand, we just, that whole chop wood, carry water, just like do the thing and let it be sacred. Let it be enough.
All right. I have 2 questions for you before we look at your chart. So you have a program called Whole Person, Whole Power, which is beautiful. So for part 1, will you share with us what a whole person is, and then share with us what you mean by whole power? I mean, in Dori's definition, that'd be a great question to ask anyone. What is a whole person to you? What is the whole power to you? That's a great question for anyone. But since you created a program around this, I'd love to hear what those phrases mean to you.
I kind of have this philosophy that we call our power back when we remember who we are. And when we live in a victim culture, pretty much, or where there's people who are kind of in power, and then there are people who in theory aren't, it's really easy without even realizing it to give away your power. And that wreaks havoc on the planet, havoc in our lives. But calling your power back doesn't mean you're suddenly on stage and you're public speaking, or you're running for president, or you're leading the army, or whatever. It means you know who you are. You have a sense for what your core values are, what your unique purpose is, what your overarching vision is for your life. And it might be very simple by different people's standards, but we're not here to judge that. It's what's correct for you. And it's, whole person is about knowing and expressing all of your parts, or knowing they're there at least. Like we're all every part in the play. When we watch a movie on TV and we have a preference for a character, the truth is the ones that we react to are probably the most alive in us. And what would happen if we owned that? Like we had, a decade or two where all the movies and books were about vampires and zombies, right? And then we think that's entertainment and it's just a movie.
I don't think it's entertainment, but thank you. A lot of people do. Yeah.
It's us being projected on the screen, and we're walking through life as
dead souls.
And the Walking Dead, and we don't know it. And in the process of not knowing it, not having awareness, we make choices or we don't make choices that are really quite harmful, if at the very least to ourselves, but often to others. And and so I stand for getting to know all of our parts, having a conversation with them, getting to know and love them. I have a beauty and I have a beast. I have my inadequate self and my very adequate self. I'm utterly insignificant and I'm utterly significant. And this challenge of being able to, we live, when we're in a body, it's the Garden of Eden story. It's in every great faith, right? When we come into the body, we feel the separation from the divine, right? and everything's kind of suddenly polarized, and we have these dualities, and we have this need to live in either or us versus them, and that serves the fire drill again, right? But the truth is that we're all of this, and so the real work of wholeness is to be able to say, I am utterly impotent some days, some ways, and I'm utterly potent on others, and to have a relationship with that part of us that's impotent and feels powerless and helpless and wants to resort to rescuer, helper, fixer, and with the part that is absolutely powerful and empowered and able, and then to bring those inside ourselves and integrate those. And the more we have an aware ego, the more we're awake, the more we're conscious, the more we're skillful, we can access the energies or the qualities of those things, because maybe I need to go flaccid to save my life in a rape situation. Maybe that's the best
Right.
I could have chosen. And maybe I need to fight back some days. And there's different ways to do it. And the more we can have a relationship with all of these parts of ourselves and integrate those and then have access as needed in the moment, that's what wholeness makes possible. And it's also just joyful to know all of our parts. You know, I have a client once that came to me. He said he was a chief financial officer in a major, like, Fortune 100 company. So, you know, he was making high six figures or more, right? And he said, I'm about to quit my third job in a year, and I don't know why. And that's why he hired me. And long story short, we discovered that he has, you know, he's a provider of a family of 5. He loves being a CFO. He's a father, a husband. These are all personas, all parts of him, right? But guess what? He's also a watercolor artist and a photographer, and apparently fairly accomplished. But he was living in the either or. Either I can be an artist and provide for my family, or I can be a CFO and provide for my family. The artist was sabotaging his CFO, right? And it wasn't getting expressed. And
right.
But in his polarized worldview, he could be either one or the other. And it was creating a lot of confusion. But as we worked together and he got to know what are my core values and what are my parts, and he started to have different relationships with his different parts and feeling into them too and everything, he was like, well, you know what? I like being a CFO, and I like that it lets me provide for my family a certain way. And I like this, and I like that. And I like being an artist, and I like this. And long story short, he quit that job. He took a job with a nonprofit in the arts, and nobody would have thought that, but he was making more money there than he made in all of his corporate jobs. And he found the courage to say, I'm an artist. And they negotiated a 4-day work week. On the 5th day, he rented studio space in an art colony in the city where he lived, and was happy as could be. His inner artist was happy, happy, happy. His inner provider was happy. His inner father was happy. His inner husband was happy. His inner CFO was happy, and all the other parts of him. And so was his family. And by the time we were done, he was starting to put a price tag on his art. And he was negotiating space in a gallery in town to put some of his art. And he was going to art fairs on weekends for fun. And he didn't need it wasn't an either or thing. It was a yes and thing. And it's like his artist and his CFO and all these other parts came inside, and they all got to sit at the table and get expressed. And that mattered. And that's an example of the journey to wholeness. Like, inevitably, we're all journey to wholeness. It's the natural course of life. Just like a rose bush will bloom, and then eventually everything will die, and it'll, go dormant for a bit, and then it'll bloom again. That's the natural course of life, and we're like that too. And so we have to, but it helps to know we're not just this one thing or this one thing, and all of that's facing out, right? And then to know who we are, we have to kind of do a U-turn and come back in.
Yeah, you made me reflect on my life, and I've had an aha that think of my artist. My inner artist was doing a lot of the sabotage, because I'm giving that part of me a big birth now. I mean, birth, BERTH. And I guess a birth, but a big wide space to express itself. And yeah, I can see why it got mad in the past, because I had like completely shunted this part of myself in the corner.
Yeah.
And it was like, no, this is a core part of who you are. Like, bring this back out. And now my only regret is I didn't spend more time with my artist instead of walling over some guy I met, or the nonsense, losing the last 5 pounds or whatever bullshit the society was mashing in my head that was supposed to be important, when I really would have been better served going to art class. So, or just being in my studio. So yeah, that's a tremendous story. Thank you for that, Dori. All right, let's talk about emotional authority. I'll bring up your chart here in a moment because we're right on that track. So emotional authority in human design is one of the internal decision-making pathways. And 50 to 53% of humanity is emotional. I'm also emotional authority. No big surprise. Chance, flip a coin, your emotional authority. But it's essentially about understanding one's own internal emotional wave, which is in the solar plexus. And honestly, until human design, I don't even think emotions were really understood. Like psychology is so far behind human design, it's not even funny. Like I listen to psychologists and I'm like, that's so 20 years ago, but whatever. That our emotions are chemical reactions in the solar plexus. And that when someone asks for our energy, our job is to take time, actually gently push it away. Not right now. Let me sleep on it. Let me think about it. When can I get back to you? So that in distance from the original request, we get emotional clarity. Now, Ross said if we can aim for about 67% or higher emotional clarity, great, because for us, there's no truth in the now. And that's why even if someone says, do you want to go to lunch today? And they ask us at 8 a.m., how late do I have to let you know by? Because 11 may come around. It's like, I'm not feeling it. Right? I'm not feeling that lunch. And we've learned the hard way if we do things we don't feel. So before I bring up your chart, is there anything you want to share, Dori, about your experiences with emotional authority? I know you've been having some ahas of late, so I'd love to hear it in your own words, what you're experiencing.
Yeah, and for anybody who has emotional authority as their kind of strategy for their type, I know I can look back at it now and realize that, when I had people saying, oh, you're so emotional, or oh, you're so sensitive, or oh, you're so this, and it was never meant as a compliment, right? And then
Right.
I would feel self-conscious for being that person, or uncomfortable, or I try to like kind of tamp it down because, it made other people uncomfortable that I was emotional, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yet, I am a very heart-centered person. And so when I'm cut off also from my body and from my heart, so I'm cut off from what my core intelligence is, and I'm responding to the world that's telling me I'm making them uncomfortable and stop, or, it was confusing. And then I also have this deep desire to perform and be valued and needed. And so, I can see how I would ignore my emotions in the past, or just say yes to everything, say yes to everyone and yes to everything, and then get myself in trouble because I didn't want to do all those things, or I didn't even like those people, or it's just like, and
It seemed like a good idea at the time.
that learning how to say, like for me, I kind of use it this way. Another form of power is only say yes to things that are yes with capital letters, right? And if it's got a capital Y and ES, no. If it's got lower letter Y ES, no. Every other version of no is no. So it has to be yes with capital letters these days. I mean, I have the luxury to say that now. In a corporate space, I might make more trade-offs, but at least I'd have had the awareness that I was making more trade-offs. And on some level I did, but now I have it like in your face. But a core aspect, I think, of riding the emotional wave and listening to my emotional authority is also honoring the fact that I have a choice. And that's very empowering to say, I actually have a choice. And it's highly unlikely that choice I make to not go to lunch is going to disappoint that person a lot or anything. I can always invite them the next day, or say yes the next time, or change my mind,
Or not at all.
yeah,
Or it's always a no. And
yeah,
that's okay too.
yeah. But that I have a choice, and my choices matter, and what I need to, feel energized and heart-centered and embodied and solid and be a resource to others if that's what I want, that I have to consider what's actually correct or true or right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now we're living in a time where no compromise, like zero.
I kind of feel that now, and I can see even with some of my best friends, like every once in a while when I'll assert myself a certain way, and I can feel them trying to tell me what's polite or proper.
Oh, yeah, I know. Isn't that rich?
Yeah. Or that's so ungenerous of you, and I'm like, interesting
You know
statement.
what? When people say you're so nice, when people say that shit to me now, I just look at them. I go, "Oh, really? Oh, I'm so facetious. I don't care anymore." I'm like, "Really? Oh, huh? What, you gonna do my life and my body? You gonna trade with me? You gonna do those? I didn't think so. So why don't you just keep it to yourself?" And you know what I found? it's a very cool thing, though. This is the other cool part of what you're describing, though. As we get crystal clear about our yes and our no, the people that aren't for us fall away. And that's the beauty of the emotional wave. By pushing things away a few times, we get to see who's really there for us and really a good collaborative partner in whatever part of life. Or if that person has some superficial agenda, or they're just running some predatory con artist game that a lot of people run. A lot of people that run that shit. And I think that's great. I think that's great. You're making them uncomfortable. Good.
Well, and I can do
Good.
that now and still love, honor, and respect them. I
Right.
don't have to make up any stories about them.
No,
I don't have to make them wrong to make me right.
no.
I don't, and I don't make me wrong to make them
Yeah.
right. I just, that's all up here.
Yeah.
And when I live from here and in my body, it's just pure. It's just different. It's healthy.
I heard there's a great relationship coach named Annie Lala, and I know her. I've met her, but I don't really, we're not like tight, but I've met her in person. She's lovely, and she was sharing the other day in one of her classes, online thing, that there's a difference between a what you call it, a demand and a request, and you can almost always feel in the other the demand energy. But in a request energy, there's freedom to say no on both sides, right? Like, she gave the example, could you give me a ride to the airport? And if you're okay with, they might say no, it's a request. You've got a backup plan, right? And when I listen to that, it reminds me of what you're describing here, that we're so conditioned to give our power away to an authority, even if that authority is a peer group, that we don't
A
behave.
beloved friend, your spouse, and your kid. Yeah. And that's a big part of my work is helping people, and my own personal healing and growth work has been pulling out in all those projections and having authority and outer agency, like real sovereignty, and realizing and appreciating the solitude that I also love, and then realizing that my friends will still be there, my husband's still there, my kids are still there, and in fact, I'm modeling inner authority and outer agency and sovereignty for them, and creating the space for them to have their own unique expression, to be who they are, to not agree with me, to get curious about that. Like when we're in curiosity, when we're taking little action steps, when we're focused on what we want, we're in empowerment. Now we're in choice. Now we're in a whole different space. And it's maybe for some people more complicated, or, maybe there's more steps sometimes. But what I would argue is it saves all the rupture and repair.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's really good. I try to be real mindful of not creating ruptures wherever possible, because sometimes the repairs, but you can't always control that. All right, I'm going to bring up your chart.
Like I used to have attitudes about people, like when they would push, back to that emotional authority and ride the wave.
Yeah.
Yourself, sit, like kind of lean to no first, or give yourself some space. I had friends who did that, and maybe their come from was because that was their authority and they didn't even know it. Who knows? But I used to think they were neurotic pains.
I know. Yeah.
It used to make me crazy. Like, just make a decision, or just say yes or no, or stop it. Or, or when somebody would say yes, but then they'd act like it was a no and be all annoyed. And I'd want to yell at them too. But now I'm like, I'm that person. I'm like,
right.
But I can approach it, I guess, with more maturity and with more awareness for what I'm doing, and in a way that still maintains the relationship, because that matters to me.
I've been explaining it to people. I've just been telling people, like, because I have friends that are sacral and splenic, and they're very now, and spontaneous. I'm like, Beth, you want to go here? I'm like, listen, let me just tell you something. 99% of the time, if you ask me last minute, it's a no, but ask me anyways, because then it lets me know you care. Then I'm going to blow you off and say no, but because I have to know that it's right. Like, here's a perfect example. Not too long ago, a friend called me up and he had a ticket to a charity ball. Now, I love a charity ball. Get to dress up, you get to meet cool people. It's for a good cause. I mean, what's not to love? And I'm sitting at my desk thinking, well, it was last minute. I really should stay home. And I checked in with my body. My body's like, yep, right. My solar plexus. Yep. Staying home feels calm. I thought about the charity ball, didn't feel so calm. Didn't know why. It's like, yep, no. So I explained I'm not spontaneous. And then I've said to people, listen, I am not going back and forth with you to play a game or to be difficult, because I know once I commit my energy, I can't get out of it. So it has to be the right thing. And you don't want to work with me if I'm cranky. I promise you, you will regret it. But if I'm correct, just like you, Dori, I'm going to bring my full self to it, which is what they want anyways, because they
Right.
can feel our energy. And the thing is, the more we push stuff away, the sweeter the deals we get, the better the connection, right? The more harmonious the dynamic. So I just started explaining to people, I'm not spontaneous. There's no truth in the now for me. I do not move fast because I never know how I'm going to feel from one moment to the next. And if I'm in the rage part of my wave or the melancholy part of my wave or the ecstasy part of my wave, that's for me. It's not for anybody else. You get calm, Beth, or you get no Beth. Okay. You don't want that. That's for me. And so in explaining that to people, they're like, wow. And I have to really fight for it sometimes
I
because
love
people want to lay their trip on us.
that.
And I'm like, no, 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 no. I don't lay a trip on you. You can lay a trip on me, but that's just going to further delay the emotional wave. So yeah, anyway, I've just found it's helpful to explain. And I'm just sharing that for whatever it's worth because I didn't even know to explain. But now I see what a difference it makes for people where I explain to them, you're spontaneous and I love that about you. There's nothing wrong with you. I am not like that. I am not spontaneous. And most of my pain in my life, every time, was from throwing myself into something spontaneously, almost without exception.
I can relate.
Or falling into the victimizer trap. So is there anything else you want to say before I bring your chart up? Because I'd love to talk about your emotional center with those two gates you've got in the nodes. Can we do that? Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. All right, here we go. Dun, dun, dun. And I'm only showing the chart part, not your identifying details on here. All right, do you see it?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. So just for everyone who may be new to human design, this triangle off to the right as you face the body graph is the solar plexus. And whenever this is colored in, and it will be colored in brown, the solar plexus runs on a wave, and it is coming online actually as an awareness center. It's funny, Ra also mentioned this. He goes, it's rather ironic that we have despised our emotions and not known what they are, where they come from, or why we have them, or how to manage them. And also they fall sort of under the feminine energy category. So they've been kind of thrown in the dustbin, right? And now people are seeing on social media, people are trying to get in touch with their feelings. They've been trying since the 60s, right? To really get in touch with their feelings. But what's happening is we're actually mutating where the solar plexus is becoming an awareness center where we're becoming less outwardly emotional and also less sexy. There's a whole lot less sex going on the planet. Really, I mean, I'm literally at a place where I have a sex drive, but I don't care. I never thought that would ever happen to me. I'm like, well, if I never had sex the rest of my life, it's kind of like alcohol. Don't care. It's nice if it happens. Don't care. I can't even explain that, except it must be a mutation. So I just had such a high sex drive for so long. So being we're generators, right? We've got the motor. Anyway, the solar plexus is the emotional center. Now, what's so interesting in your chart is this gate 36, right? You've got it in your south node, and it's down here off the solar plexus. And then gate 6 in your north node, also off the solar plexus, right? And the nodes are the external. So, and some of this you may be familiar with, Dori, but for people that are new, the personality nodes represent what we see in the world. It's our perspective, our eyeballs, essentially, like what we see when we're looking out the window or looking at the Zoom screen. It's what you see. And then the nodes over here on the design side are actually our environment. So the way Ra described this back when he was alive is the upper sun and earth positions, the 4 of them on the design and personality, that makes up your incarnation cross. It's like the inner mission, as it were. And then the mission gets lived out very tightly on this geometry of our nodes. And I have found, although it may first feel like a restriction to some people, it's actually quite liberating to know what the themes are, right? It all starts to make sense. So I'm going to just stop the share and then I'll come back. But I want to ask you about the node story. So gate 36 is crisis, and it's usually around sexuality. So like the story you shared about you were 11, 12 years into your marriage and just it was getting stagnant and you blew it up, as it were. That would be a very gate 36 thing to do in the detriment, right? In the friction part.
Yeah, it was very unconscious. That I mean,
what was that?
I can say that now that's what I was doing, but it was very unconscious at the time that's
you
what
must have had your reasons, though. How did you rationalize it to yourself? Like, I deserve this, or was there any kind of, did you feel bad about it? Like what?
Oh yeah, I felt bad about it immediately. I was remorseful. I mean, it was clear that this is not what's needed. It
Did
was
you have remorse going into it, though, before you had the actual physical contact with the other person? Were you aware, or were you just caught up in the emotion and then you recognized after the fact, oops?
I think I was caught up in the moment. It was very much like I said, a unhealed. It was a default into that deep groove in the brain of this is what you do to numb. You can't deal with the situation, can't deal with the vulnerability, can't deal with the crisis at home, can't deal with any of it. Boom, do this thing. This is what you do to numb. Not consciously like that. It was like this weird spiral. And what it takes is a predator. I mean, it takes a predator in the mix to see that the person's available for that or vulnerable to that.
Right. Instead of like, it seems to me most mature men that I know, they've even said to me, I'm married or I'm in a relationship and I would never, or even if they're single, say I would not actively either try to disrupt my own relationship or disrupt the relationship of someone else. Now I'm assuming, but I don't want to assume. What did this individual know you were married? Yeah. So that's the thing. When someone knows you've been that vulnerable, they know your trauma, they know your situation, and they're not really looking out for you and saying, I'm really attracted to you too, but let's just enjoy the energy because you're married. And
Mhm.
I don't want you to torment yourself. Why don't we talk about why you're thinking of doing this, right? That to me is where we're being guided to go in our relationships.
Right.
Like we're looking out for each other.
And that's the maturity I have now. That's
Yeah.
the awareness I have now. And that's the pain of being conscious, is knowing that I didn't have that then and that I caused so much pain because of it. And whether we want to say it was needed or not, or all the other reasons, the fact is that I created a big giant mess and I blew a lot of things up, and I don't love that happened. And
And it didn't
we
happen
learned.
in a vacuum.
No.
I do want to, I mean, I know you know this, but when you talk about it, it still feels like maybe, I don't know, there's some guilt or
Well,
because when you talk more about the story, I'm like, other than your kids, okay, they're kid, right? But like everybody else was kind of playing their part in this mess. You know what I mean? It wasn't like anyone was looking out for each other. Everybody was in their own kind of like, I need that your husband's in his I need, and this guy's in his I need, and you're in my I need, right? And we get in this I got to have it thing, or I'm not getting it thing. And then we feel like, I think, subtly justified in the acting out. But then life teaches us there's a better way,
yeah.
less painful way.
And maybe at the time, just like going limp in a sexual assault, that was all I knew to do.
And it might have been the best thing, because I tell you what, I think about myself. I've only been in a couple situations like that in my life, and the guy's just very lucky he didn't try anything, because he would be dead and I would be in jail. So there's sometimes our body knows like this is going to suck, but you're better going limp than murdering someone. You know what I mean? Or injuring someone, getting sued by your predator. I mean, there's all these things you don't know. And I would offer to you that given the nature of the situation, you can trust the body because you're still here and you're here and you're thriving, which
Well,
is a miracle, Dori.
and part of that is because I had like an awesome therapist for the third round of therapy. My husband stood by my side. We committed, we realized that we didn't stop loving each other. We didn't like each other at the time, but we didn't stop loving each other, and we relied on that. And that it's part of why I do the work I do, because I don't think you can peel the layers of these onions off of ourselves or each other and go deep. Our tendency to do the psychological overlay, to just wallow in guilt, to feel horrified by ourselves or whatever, it gets so strong that we start to shut it out because we don't want to feel those things. But then we don't get to go deeper. We don't get to get inside. We don't get to the love, joy, and ecstasy. My husband, he'll say now, he goes, I'll be damned if you do all this work and somebody else gets to benefit. It's like,
It's true, because he's really right. He's really right, because wherever you go, there you are. He'd have the same problem in another relationship. You'd have the same problem if you didn't actually resolve it.
yeah. So, I mean, so he was the container that held me, that taught me what family could be that I didn't have. And then he became that at a whole nother level, after this happened. And we became equal partners in that process. And that changed everything for us. that did bring the harmony, that did bring the stability. He didn't just hold that, and then I was the roller coaster. We now can work, each end to end all along the continuum. And we have much more capacity as individuals and as a couple that we didn't have before. And that makes the relationship interesting and keeps it interesting. We've been married 33 years. Our boys love us and still come home and bring their friends. And, we're happy. And we kind of look at each other and go, wow, how'd we get here? It's pretty awesome.
You're such a role model for what's possible. Before you go, let's talk a little bit about, I want to mention your book. I'll finish up with that. But before we go, let's touch on gate 6, which is your north node now. For the rest of your life, you're in the frequency of gate 6, which is about fundamentally on a physical level, having balanced pH. So its detriment is friction. Its attribution is harmony. We move back and forth we're in friction almost constantly if we're living, right? Because we're in the unknown. We didn't come to Earth to not be evolving. So anything in life that doesn't keep moving doesn't stand a very good chance. But what's been your physical real life experience of harmony as you've been getting older? Or what is harmony to Dori? However you'd like to answer that. I'm just curious about your take on harmony and friction.
Well, one of my core values, the word I use is tangy. And my marketing person said, don't you mean harmony? I was like, actually, no, the word is tangy.
But like Tangy, tangy. Yeah, like
it's like the bitter and the sweet. It's like it's being able to hold the tension and not have to resolve it. That's what gets us in lots of trouble in the moment.
Yes.
It's being able to sit in the heart of the paradox and say, I can feel my terror of this part of me, and I can feel the part of me that wants to dissolve into the part I prefer. Oh, that's interesting. Feel that. It's being able to hold these things and then keep bringing them in and hold them and get curious and get playful and have a relationship and then bring them in. And so then we can be vulnerable and we can be powerful. We can be joyful and we can be sad and we can hold these bits. And to me, that's harm. Like when you stand on one leg and you balance, like I had knee replacement surgery back in November, right? And I had to do a lot of one leg things. And, when you're standing on one leg and you're balanced for whatever, 60 seconds, if you pay attention, you're in constant motion. Balance isn't stillness necessarily. There's constant motion. Seems still, right? In your first trimester of pregnancy, it doesn't look like anything's happening, but you're exhausted all the time because every cell in your body is working harder than it ever has in your life, and so there's those unseen forces and the seen forces, and it's being able to be in relationship with all of it. That to me is harmony. But we can't do that if we don't acknowledge it. Or like, I'll use another example. When I played string bass, I play upright string bass for a long time. And it's the bass line in an orchestra. And if you have, a symphony orchestra, like in the full, and, they've got the wind instruments, you've got the drums, you've got all the stringed instruments. If let's say you play this beautiful concert and the bass section isn't there for the first half of the concert, you might leave at intermission and go, that was good. That was all right. They're really good. And then after intermission, the bass section comes back and now you have the floor, like the foundation of the sound, right? And the depth of the sound and the experience. And people maybe don't even notice that the bass section was gone or now that it's back, but they leave and they felt goosebumps through their whole body and they're moved and they even were brought to tears and they're like, oh, I'm so glad I came. That was unbelievable. But it's because all of the parts in the play were there. Part. That's harmony. Like that's harmony when everyone that needs to be at the table is.
I love that you shared that because to me, music is probably one of the most accessible and simple ways to understand life. And if you just look at a keyboard, right? 88 keys, they're white and they're black. And if you just play the white keys, you've got sort of an upbeat sound. If you just play the black keys, you've got a melancholy sound. And you get high notes and low notes and everything in between, right? And so when they're combined beautifully, you have a piece of music. It might be melancholy, it might be upbeat, what have you. But there's a sense of, wow, that's a really complete vibration right there. That was a really complete, piece, whether it's a symphony or a simple ditty, right? And how if, say, the drum solo doesn't ever stop, Or we just, when people say, oh, it's one note, someone just keeps hitting that high note or always hitting that low note. To me, that's when someone's stuck. They're
Mhm.
stuck in a pattern, right? If they're enraged, they've got anger management problems, or they've got sadness addiction, or they've got, hi, how are you? And they're just
Put a
happy
happy
all the
face on it. The
time.
whole put a
Hi,
happy
how are
face
you?
on
I'm great. I'm great. My dog died today and the cake fell and my house burned down, but everything's just, it's fabulous. Yeah.
it.
So we have this like emotional range, right? And we can get stuck in it. So what do you do when you find that you're stuck on a note? Are there some ways you get yourself, do you notice it? And then when you notice it, how do you shift it into a new sound, new frequency?
Okay, so this is going to sound weird maybe, but two things. One, I go to the water. I just, whether it's in my imagination or literally, the pool, the ocean, the shower, and I just let it wash over me and bring the whole, like it brings all of life. And the second thing is I think I do this intuitively and probably more and more consciously as I get older, is I go to disharmony. Like I intentionally create disharmony.
Mm-hmm.
Like I might, even if it's something as simple as if I walk and I normally turn right, I'll turn left. I'll, make something differently, or I'll organize the day differently, or I like even like kind of intentionally play devil's advocate or pick a fight, or something like, because sometimes nature will bring it to me. I'll sit out in the yard and all of a sudden the hawk will take out the dove, and it's
Right.
like,
Right.
what
There
just
it
happened?
is. Bam.
Right.
Lovely nature. So peaceful.
And it's like, oh, there it is, right? Like it's like you need that too. Like, or I'll put jazz music on. Like to me, it's a little bit more chaotic, right? And
Oh, I
and
love jazz. Jazz like relaxes me. Yeah. I find it very relaxing.
it's
Uh,
more my background music.
yeah. Yeah.
So I won't be disruptive for the sake of being disruptive, but I'm really clear that, especially at this stage of my life, like we've built a beautiful home, life has kind of gotten easier. I did the whole home redesign a year ago, and I really wanted to create beauty and a sense of peace so that everywhere I turned, I felt joyful, right? And stuff. But even that, like, it's like, then it's like lazy boy, like I just get too comfortable, right? Like we have to, so I'll take a course, or I'll sign up for another year of mystery school, and I'll travel places that are hard to get to, and I'll be with people that I don't always want to spend time with, but that
Right.
or like, they kind of tweak me. But
Right. But
it's,
they make you grow. Those people are
yes,
like
like it's
growth
like,
catalysts.
I call it
Yes.
building a conflict competency. You're
Yeah.
developing muscles. You need to be with things that get you to the edge and grow you,
That's
and
right.
that aren't just comfortable. Like that, I think comfort is killing us. There's nothing wrong with comfort, but like I can see my own behavior. Like my husband and I like to watch our shows and wind down at the end of the night. But sometimes I'm like, whoa, we gotta bust this up and do something different, because I feel like I'm like dissolving into the couch. And if I'm doing it consciously, fine, but if I'm not, I'm not usually fine. So
So,
is that
Dory, I
answered
have an
your
idea.
question?
Yes, you totally did. But I have an idea for you and I want to share it on the podcast. You don't have to answer, right? Because you're emotional authority, but your environment, which we didn't talk about today, but I know your environment's kitchen's wet. And as you were sharing, I was thinking about the healing property of water, but just something to consider, maybe getting certified in Watsu. And I'm getting chills. And what Watsu, Watsu, what it is?
Is that
All right.
a
So
floating? Go ahead.
yeah, well, the person you get in the swimming pool with someone and you hold them kind of gently underneath and you move them around and you just gently articulate their body and stretch it. And you can be as gentle or as, kind of assertive as the client wants, but it helps the client to relax, to learn trust, but also allows you to be in the water.
Mhm.
And I'm just thinking like you have this beautiful space. If you felt comfortable, if the client was vetted enough, the kind of thing where you could maybe have a VIP day
Mhm.
with some water to
Mhm.
create the body integration. Because I feel now what people want is experiences and they want more embodiment. And these are places you're very skilled. So I want to really challenge you, as I do with everyone, but challenge you to think about a way you could bring together this business wisdom with this great physicality and musicality and love of nature you have, like the whole of Dori being experienced by the person coming to you for your guidance more
I
than
love that.
maybe you've ever done it before. Yeah.
And I have had Watsu, like a Watsu session before at one of our retreat centers when we were at mystery school many years ago now. But this need, there's so much longing for belonging and for tenderness and for touch and to see and be seen. That's why I call the work I do very high touch, high intimacy. Even if we're not physically touching, people feel touched.
Yeah.
And it's so vital, like that whole, failure to thrive thing. Like it's true as adults and in all stages of our lives, not just when we're infants, that we need this. And so bringing people into a relationship with their body or even holding them, like I do physically create, safe and courageous space for people. The people I work with, they hold everybody in their lives. They're servant leaders. They're always in service. Who's holding them? And so I love that.
Yeah, I think people need to be literally held now. I think people are so mentally tapped. All these years of strategy hasn't changed much for people. We know talk therapy barely works. People have to actually take action. But there's the other side of it, like you're speaking to. There's a deficit of love. There's a deficit of harmony. There's a deficit of intimacy. And you are a person who came from that deficit, was horrifyingly victimized from what you've shared with me. It just feels like you didn't know. Like, how could you know? It's what you knew. You didn't know what you didn't know. And then you found out and you set out to change your life and you've created this beautiful life filled with love, on every level. You love yourself. The people in your family love themselves. It's not like you never have problems, but you have ways in which to work those out without hurting and destroying one another emotionally. I mean, you're such a testament to change can happen with the willingness and the support.
Yeah.
And the support. So any final words, if you were to send off our audience with something to contemplate, what would you like to give them?
I always come back to like one of my favorite quotes. Maya Angelou is one of my muses. And one of my favorite quotes of hers is thriving is important. I mean, surviving is important. Thriving is elegant. And
yeah,
for even those of us who are, very privileged, well off, were born in the right place, had parents and a roof over our head, whatever it was that helped us get beyond 18 or 25. I mean, for so many of us, especially in our complex and chaotic world, even though we may live in a beautiful, peaceful space or have a pretty backyard or whatever, the truth is we're a lot of us in survival mode.
mm-hmm.
We don't even know how jacked up our central nervous system is and how stressed out we are and how much that's like really having us live from our reptilian brain. And then, there's this thing called thriving, but what does that mean? And I really believe human design, part of why I love human design is because I've always believed that, if we see ourselves as leaders, at the very least in our own lives, and self-leadership is a big part of my work, self-leadership, self-love, self-mastery, then we will make the choices that let us create the conditions within and around us necessary to thrive. And that in that process, we're modeling that for others and we're teaching others or we're helping create that for other people. And yes, some days all we can do is survive. Some days that's all that we can do, and that's what's required of us. And other days, this is possible. And then there's all this capacity along the continuum that's also possible. And so imagine if there were more balance between these. Imagine if we could come off the, amygdala hijack attack, and we could actually find inner peace and inner and outer alignment and choose in ways that are correct for us and really know that in our heart and our body, not just in our mind, and engage with one another from there. Like imagine that world. It doesn't mean there isn't conflict. It doesn't mean there isn't friction. You've said it many times, like the friction is like the sand in the oyster that makes the pearl. Like it's necessary. It's necessary. Like when managers used to say, like, I wish they'd just do what I say. Well, then they don't need you. The friction is there to grow us up and to help us pause and see what are we even solving the problem that needs to be solved? So those, survival is important, thriving is elegant. And then another one of my favorites is by Richard Bach from his book Illusions.
Oh, I love all his books.
And
Yeah. I
maybe
remember reading that years ago. I was probably like 14, 15 when I read that. Yeah.
And maybe this is me being very Enneagram 3, but you're never given a wish without being given the power to make it true. You may have to work for it, however. And what I say is, and we don't have to do this work alone. I invest in my work with you because you're this beautiful person who's also modeling for me what I want and need. And you're my
Oh,
role model. And we all need that. I'm a coach, but I would never coach another person without having my own coach.
right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't lay that all on my husband,
Right.
or my friends. That's my work. And so that's true too. Is like, but what I can say is in the process, virtually every moment of every day, no matter what life brings, we get to experience the rapture of being alive.
That is
That's the
true.
payoff. We get to know what joy actually is in life. We get to experience awe every day. It's not just sadness. And if we don't do this work, then what I assert is that we create unnecessary suffering, and not just for ourselves, but for everyone else around us.
Oh, absolutely. We're not really here to suffer. I mean, suffering is meant to be like an incidental that we get through because we're going to make mistakes and suffer. That's, all, animals suffer in nature, that kind of thing. But yeah, you're really speaking to the heart of it, that the more aware we become, the more choices we have about the experience. Or are we just in survival, or are we
And making
That's right.
choices we can, and flowing where we need to. And there are a lot of different ways to do life.
Oh, thanks, Dori. This is great. I love talking with you. I want to share with everyone. Dori's in a collection book called Engaging Speakers, Voices of Hope. And I do recommend you can order this on Amazon. Again, the book is Voices of Hope. And I've read the whole book. The stories are extraordinary. And Dori has a chapter in here where she shares more in depth about the suicide of her sister and the effect that had on you, Dori, in your life. So please get a copy of this. And Dori, thank you again for being you.
Thank you.
Yeah, such a pleasure. All right, everyone, we'll be back soon with more great content about people living their purpose and expressing their design in the world. And we'll see you all soon. Bye for now. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Aligned to Your Design. If you did, please grab my free report, Business by Design, at yourpurpose.com, and then join our Facebook group, Align to Your Design. See you next time.